You think you're a crusader? Are you trying to be Don Quixote? Are you trying to clean up the system? And I keep on telling people, if wealthy, rich old men like me don't do it, who's going to do it?
How did you select the right fund manager for yourself?
A lot of this was luck. And one of the people whom I give a lot of credit for, the only reason actually I am in this place is because of Rakesh Jhunjhunwala. One regret is sometimes I wish I wasn't so blunt. In the sense, I end up making a lot of enemies unnecessarily. This is something my wife gets very upset about.
Welcome to the India Opportunity Podcast. Hello and welcome everyone to the India Opportunity Show, where we explore the journeys of innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders shaping India's future. Today we have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Aniruddha Malpani, a renowned IVF specialist, angel investor, and an outspoken advocate for healthcare transparency and patient education. Malpani Ventures, set up as a family office, has invested about 100 crores so far into the startup ecosystem, and their goal is to invest 500 crores more over the next 5 years. Dr. Malpani is not only a pioneer in the field of reproductive medicine, but has also made a significant mark in the startup ecosystem through his investments and sharp critique of the status quo. His views on the decline of major players like Byju's, his viral presence on social media, and his ongoing efforts to educate and empower have earned him a unique place in both the healthcare and investment sectors. I'm so excited to dive into his journey today and share his story with all of you. Hope you enjoy watching. Welcome, Dr. Malpani. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. You have had a fascinating journey into the world of startup ecosystem, even though you come from the IVF and healthcare world. Tell us a little bit more about your journey in the reproductive medicine space. Let's start from there, because even though startup folks know you now, a lot of them might not be familiar with your healthcare background.
Okay, fair enough. So, I think the one thing about being a doctor is it's a very predictable journey. It's very cut and dried and boring. So both my parents were doctors. So it was pretty much assumed that I would become a doctor too. I was academically bright, did well, got into medical college. IVF was the hot new thing, which is why I did IVF. And it's extremely gratifying, which is why I continue doing it. I practice with my wife, which is very helpful because, IVF is something which you do for an infertile couple who's trying to have a baby. So it's sometimes easier for the wife to talk to my wife. And they're both very good at complaining about how terrible their husbands are. And that's something my wife can resonate with. So she gives them a shoulder to cry on, which I'm not very good at. But on the other hand, I can also get them to understand that men are from Mars, women are from Venus. Sometimes men say things in order to be supportive, but it ends up being something else. So that's been a great journey. We've been doing it for many, many years now. In fact, we're one of India's first IVF clinics. And the reason it's being such an interesting ride is I always tell people the emotional income you get by doing IVF. It pays well. I'm not cribbing. But having said all this, ultimately, remember, a doctor is still a daily wage earner, which means you only get paid when you work. And at some point, as you get older, I'm sure at some point doctors will have to look for alternative means. And the problem with being a daily wage earner is that the amount you can increase your capacity only happens two ways. Either you then hire additional people, or you open more clinics, or you look for an alternative source. So that was an option which we were offered quite a few years ago. Like I said, you're doing such a great job. You're changing people's lives dramatically for the better. Why don't you set up more clinics? So it's something we considered. And then we realized that what I think makes our clinic special is the fact that we're a boutique clinic. It's only Dr. Anjali and me. We take care of all our patients. We're one on them. IVF is a very personal issue. It has marital distress, emotional distress, social consequences. So people really need someone they can talk to. And I'm not saying that you can't find other doctors who are equally good, but to be able to scale it up and not lose that personal touch was something we found very, very challenging. And the trouble with starting a chain is that you then start focusing on revenue, numbers, profits. Whereas when you're a doctor in solo practice, you focus on, hey, I need to keep my patients happy. Ultimately, medicine is a service business. And it's a very gratifying profession because you change people's lives, especially with IVF, dramatically for the better. And it's the technology, which means, things you couldn't even dream of doing 50 years ago, we can actually do today. So something I enjoy, something I'm sure I'll keep on enjoying. But we also need to balance it with other stuff, which is where hopefully you can segue into your next part and say, why did I become an angel investor?
I will definitely do that. But there's also a very interesting trend that I've seen. Being in my early 30s, I've often encountered couples who have to go towards an IVF treatment because people are getting married later, they're having children later. So a lot of the issues that arise during when you're trying to get pregnant, the landscape has shifted dramatically. So can you just talk about a little bit about the market size of the space? How has this space evolved in terms of IVF treatment from when you started to the journey now?
Happy to do that. So, because we were one of the first few clinics, we spent a lot of time on patient education because people didn't understand what IVF was. Oh, test your baby, great. You're going to give us a baby after 9 months. People didn't realize the success rates, the failure rates. They often got confused with donor sperm and in vitro fertilization. So, in fact, we were one of India's first clinic to have a website. I'm a big believer in patient education, and the internet was very new in those days. I don't know, but this was before your time, perhaps. But we would dial up and use a modem and still use shell accounts. And
Yeah.
anyway, so things gradually got better. And we said, of course, we educate our patients one on one, but why not one on many? So,
Right.
which is why we had a website which is going strong. Now we have a YouTube channel, multiple different ways of getting the message across. So, I think one thing which has changed dramatically is there's a lot more awareness about the fact that IVF is available as an option for infertile couples, which is great. So, which is why we talk about things like egg freezing, what IVF can do. Do you know what the downside to that is? People have very unrealistic expectations sometimes of IVF. Oh, everyone gets pregnant after IVF.
Or
Not true.
everyone has twins if you do IVF.
I
I
mean,
feel.
it's a long list of myths, and
Yeah.
I'm happy to share that with you. But that bothers me a little bit. But you know what actually bothers me even more is two things. One is how poorly informed even young, educated women, whether they're MBAs or anything else, are about their own reproductive health.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of these women don't understand the concept of ovarian reserve, ovarian aging. It's like, hey, I can run a marathon, so of course I'll be able to get pregnant when I want. I wish. So again, I think there's still a lot of gap there. But the other thing which bothers me even more is the fact that in response to what you're calling a market, and honestly, it bothers me when people call it a market because I'm still an old fashioned doctor. I still like treating patients one on one. But the moment you start thinking of it in terms of a market or a business, I think things get very distorted. And let me also tell you one thing. There was a time when I was very proud of being a doctor. I'm not proud of being a doctor anymore. I think the medical profession, and again, I'm going to say things which are going to ruffle a lot of feathers, but if at this age I can't do it, when will I ever be able to do it? But I think the medical profession has sold itself out. I think it's a terrible thing. In the beginning, it was all kickbacks and cuts, and it's just progressively got worse. And the medical profession actually let not just the profession down, but society down. The definition of a profession is you're allowed to regulate yourself. But the moment you fail at regulating yourself, that's when the government steps in. As a result of which, now there's so many constraints. It's honestly no fun being a doctor anymore because there's just so many rules. And who passes these rules? It's typically bureaucrats who don't understand a thing, completely clueless. So it's ultimately doctors who suffer. And when doctors suffer, it's the patients who suffer, whether it's unnecessary expense, unnecessary paperwork. And I can understand, they'll say, oh, but doctors are crooks. But, one doctor is a crook and therefore you treat all the other 99 doctors as crooks is not necessarily the right way of doing it. But that's unfortunately what's happened. So it's not even just a question of all the paperwork. I think there's so much mis-selling in IVF. And again, that's something, and we've talked about this for many, many years. I think it's great as a life-changing technology, but the problem is it's so overused, abused, and misused. So you get a lot of couples who could happily make a baby in their bedroom. But it's so easy to scare a patient into doing things because patients are emotionally vulnerable. Oh, you're the doctor, you're the expert, you tell us what to do. And that bothers me because once a patient has been taken for a ride by one doctor, that patient will never trust any other doctor again. And unfortunately, I think the medical profession has let patients down. Because the word doctor is derived from the word dossier, which means to teach. Now, patients don't enjoy going to Dr. Google to find out stuff because they get confused, they get lost. Google sells itself. I have a very low opinion of that company because, it's all ads, ads, ads all the time. So whom do you trust? But the problem is because patients aren't sophisticated enough, they aren't used to critical thinking. They pretty much accept what they get at face value. And then they end up doing a lot of stuff. And then once you've had a bad experience, it just becomes hard. I actually think this was a huge opportunity. This was a huge, and this was many, many years ago, where we said every doctor has an ethical responsibility to have their own website. Raised a lot of hackles. A lot of, oh, you're using your website for advertising and marketing yourself. And, good doctors don't need all this and patients will come to us. I said, times have changed. Of course, word of mouth is still extremely important. But what about all the hundreds of patients who can't come to Mumbai? Don't you have a responsibility towards them? And patients trust doctors. So when doctors provide information in vernacular languages, it's a face they can trust. And I think when doctors have failed to do this, that's the reason why patients are forced to go to commercial sites where they get scammed and cheated and stuff. But the moment you say anything, people say, "Oh, you're a blackguard. You just want to knock other doctors. You just want to badmouth them. You just want to position yourself as being holier than thou." So it's very, very hard. But it still bothers me a lot. So I think the good thing is there's reliable information available out there. But having said all this, Google is not going to guide you to this reliable information.
Yeah.
So, therefore, I always tell patients, please use the website, but use it intelligently. So, flip it around. It's better to go to, let's say, a government of UK website on infertility or, something, or let's say Mayo Clinic, because you know that information is not going to be commercially contaminated. Once you've done your homework and you have a sound background, then you can start asking your doctor more intelligent questions. Does that make sense? Very long,
Yeah.
winding answer. I'm sorry. My wife keeps on saying, once someone gives you a chance to talk, you never shut up.
No, I love it. I always encourage my guests to be as vulnerable and as authentic as they want to be. And I really appreciate you doing that today. I also want to talk about a lot of startups that are building in the healthcare space really struggle to get through the doctor network, right? Because of the issues that you just highlighted. A lot of them are not able to show the hyperscale and quick growth that VCs demand of them. And we've seen so many startups struggle in the healthcare space because of this. What is your opinion as a doctor? How do you look at the healthcare startups that are building in the space? What are the opportunities that you foresee? And what is the right way to work with the network of doctors?
So I'll tell you what I think. I'm not a big believer in the VC model. And I'm telling you upfront. And again, VCs hate me for that.
Yeah.
Part of the problem is I think the VC model in India is a copy and paste of the VC model in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And Silicon Valley is designed for disruption because capital is cheap. So you're okay with backing 100. You don't care if 99 fail as long as you get that one winner. That's not the way the startup ecosystem in India works, number one. And especially in healthcare, you cannot afford to break things. You need to be respectful. There is a reason why things are done a particular way. And I think a lot of these startups end up antagonizing doctors. And they're completely clueless about the workflow of a doctor. Now, it's not like doctors are dinosaurs or we're technology phobic. Hey, we're not dumb. Most doctors could easily have got into IIT and done engineering as well. But unless we can see that it adds value, and sometimes what happens is a lot of these IT startups will overpromise and underdeliver. And once you've burnt your fingers, you're kind of saying, I heard all this story 5 years ago. I'm not convinced anymore.
Right.
But I do have a point of view about this, and I think there's a huge opportunity. And this is one of the reasons why we've actually started what we call MICE Labs. MICE Labs is an acronym for Medical Innovation, Creativity, and Entrepreneurship. And this is in JJ Hospital, and we started this in partnership with the IITs. Because the one thing which hospitals have is access to patients. And that's the one thing engineers die for, and they don't have. And engineers aren't always very empathetic, and they're not very good at seeing the patient's perspective or even the doctor's perspective. So you have two options. One is that you either get engineers embedded in the healthcare system so they understand how it works. But the trouble is, engineers want, in that sense, quick solutions. And engineers think very linearly. You write a line of code, that code's always going to work. The reality is biology is a complex adaptive system, and pardon my French, but Mother Nature is a bitch. So just because it works well in a mouse or it works well in a petri dish or it works well in Silicon Valley doesn't mean it's going to work well in India. And unless you respect and understand that. So one of the great things we're trying to do, for example, in the mice labs, is to try to get doctors to think like engineers.
Right.
What does that mean? It means doctors are very focused on that one on one. When you're my patient, my entire energy is on making you get what you want. It's a service profession. My job is to delight you, but it's always one on one. We're so used to cramming textbooks and so used to doing what we're told to do by our senior professors. That's very hard for us to think outside. Whereas the good thing about engineers is they think about one and say, oh, great, how can I extrapolate this to 100 other people? If I'm going to create a solution for one, why don't I just create it for 100? And that's what I meant about getting doctors to think like engineers.
Right.
So this is actually a multidisciplinary. So we get it catching them young because they're medical students. They don't have all those preconceived notions. And we run medical hackathons. We do this in engineering colleges, medical colleges. We put together groups of engineers, doctors, nurses, design thinkers, so that we need to meet India's unmet clinical needs. There's
Right.
no point in meeting unmet clinical needs of American patients because you don't have the right to win. But you know what? If you meet the unmet clinical needs of Indian patients, you have the right to win. Partly, A, there's so many of them, and partly because no Silicon Valley guy is ever going to care about Indian patients. So, huge opportunities.
Yeah.
And the beauty is, Indian professors who have so much clinical experience and see these problems every day are so busy doing their clinical work that they don't get a chance to document this. Now, imagine if a senior professor tied up with a junior medical student or a resident who could then actually, who understands tinkering, who understands sensors, who understands AI. So much of this thing can happen. So I'm the eternal optimist. So your next question is, do we have any success stories? Just one. But I still think it's early days. So we just got a patent for doing minimally invasive treatment for PCO patients, which
Okay.
is, so I'm an IVF doctor. I see PCO patients every day. We treat them in a particular way. Could we treat them in a way which didn't require a laparoscopy because that's a surgical procedure? Which is why we tied up with this is organization within IIT called BETIC, and they came up with great ideas. Now it's still in process. We still have a long way to go. But it's just that when you put two different ways of thinking about things together, I think magic can happen. And India has so much human capital and so many patients.
Yeah. And because you touched upon it, I have to ask you, what are the use cases of AI that you're seeing in healthcare?
I
What
think
are
that
you really excited about?
everything. I think there are two things. I think the big problem is that a lot of doctors are unnecessarily scared about AI, partly because, doctors are very conservative. You get threatened by change. This is the way I've been doing things for the last 30 years, and I'm God's gift to mankind, and I know everything. And all these idiotic kids come with all this stuff, and I'm not interested in listening to it, which I think is such a shame. And the point about AI is helps a good doctor become better. It cuts down your administrative work, just for an example. It helps you in making better decisions.
Yeah.
It helps you in reminding stuff. Hey, doctor, this patient has fever. You thought it's malaria. Have you at least considered typhoid? And it's like you could actually have a conversation with ChatGPT. And
Yeah.
let's be honest, medical knowledge decays so rapidly. Like we used to tell people in medical college, half of what we're going to teach you is wrong, but we don't know which half, and you'll only find out after 5 years. So how could I possibly remember everything? It's impossible.
Yeah.
Why should I waste my time doing that? What my patient needs from me is empathy and compassion. And no AI engine or robot ever going to provide that. So why don't I focus on establishing the relationship with my patient? And then not only using AI for myself, but encouraging my patient to use AI so they become better informed. So we have an AI chatbot on our website. And honestly, I use my patients as unpaid research assistants. I said, you should know a lot more about IVF than I do. I'm not telling you to do it in your bedroom. You're still going to require me. But you should understand the difference between a good IVF doctor, a bad IVF doctor. The more you know, the less your anxiety levels, the less your stress levels, because you know exactly what's going to happen. So I think it's just a matter of time. And the trouble is, it usually takes one generation of senior doctors to die before change occurs. But you will
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah. But in terms of use cases, which are the ones that you're most excited about?
I think the low hanging fruit, again, I love using all these buzzwords. It makes me sound so fancy. Yeah. Sorry, pardon me. But I think a lot of that stuff obviously is going to be in image analysis, whether it's radiology, whether it's pathology, again for multiple reasons. So that's been well established.
Yeah.
A lot of it is to reduce the scut work which a doctor does. So, for example, a lot of AIs are used as medical scribes, which
Yeah.
means when you have a conversation with the patient, you have a little tablet recording everything, which automatically populates the medical record. So it
Right.
just stops the doctor from having to spend the entire time buried in the computer screen. You can look the patient in the eye and not have to worry about making notes. And doctors' handwriting is notoriously illegible. So a lot of these things, and you're seeing this play out across multiple fields. And the great thing about AI is the pace of change is exponential.
Yeah.
I think lots human beings have a hard time wrapping their head around exponential. We're so used to linear, which is what we've seen throughout our lifetime, is that exponential just is mind blowing. So I find that exciting. And that's the reason why I love being an angel investor. Because you come across all these bright guys. I'll tell you one problem with becoming old. You become cynical, you become skeptical. You say in our time we did all this. आजकल के बच्चे हैं सिर्फ टिकटॉक करते हैं, ट्विटर पे जाते हैं, कुछ समझते नहीं. हम इतना काम करते थे. I used to travel 15 miles every day to go to school. Sorry, not me, but I'm just saying,
Yeah.
those are kind of
Yeah.
things. And I think, the gap is just becoming, and then all the young generation think of how all these are uncles and aunties who don't understand anything and all dinosaurs. And I think that gap is widening. And I think the great thing about being an angel investor is obviously, when you're handing out money, people are very respectful. So they talk to you nicely, but you get to learn very, very quickly. And that's the amazing thing. So I think I measure, like I said, when I practice medicine, I measure what I call my emotional income or my joy on working. And similarly, as far as my angel investment piece goes, I measure my learning on investment because you get to learn so fast. Usually, you get to learn by losing money. So I've lost a lot of it, which is fine. And I continue expecting losing more because that's the nature of startups. They're fragile. You don't know where something's going to come from tomorrow. And no matter how well intentioned the entrepreneur is, the reality is, again, pardon my French, it happens. So I think if it happens for circumstances outside your control, I'm very forgiving. I'm a big boy. I've lost money before. I expect to lose money again. I'm not fussed about that. But I do get upset when entrepreneurs kind of, aren't very open about it. Hey, you have a problem? Tell us. We are on your side. We
Yeah.
actually have skin in the game. We put money up. We're happy to help you succeed. And even if you don't succeed, at least shut down systematically. Don't ruin your reputation and don't ruin the reputation of the startup. But it's quite a hard battle because when your startup isn't doing well, uh, entrepreneurs can get very emotional
Yeah.
and they don't often think straight. But
Yeah. And in angel investing, you get your losses way before you get your winners, and winners take forever. But how does your background in medicine influence your investment philosophy, especially when investing in startups? Do you see parallels between building a successful practice and scaling a startup?
absolutely. So, step number one, as a doctor in private practice, I'm an entrepreneur. I need to delight my patients every single day. And that's exactly what we're trying to teach our entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
That the only reason for your existence is to keep your users happy. How do you delight them? So, to that extent, I can empathize far more with entrepreneurs than perhaps a VC or whatever else can, because I deal with patients, so I understand what is involved. I think the second thing is one thing being a doctor teaches you is compassion, because patients are vulnerable. They need a shoulder to cry on when an IVF cycle fails. And this is something, and then, entrepreneurs need a shoulder to cry on when they need to shut their startup down. So I think we can be a little more compassionate perhaps than someone else. So I think that's the second thing. And the third thing is I think we're much more used to dealing with failure because the reality is most IVF cycles will fail, just like most startups will fail. So the failure is just the beginning of the next cycle.
Yeah.
You can step back, you can say what did we learn, what went well, what can we correct, what we can't. So I think all that fits in extremely well. And the other thing is, as I told you, one thing we've always done as doctors is educate patients. So one of the things we try to do in our family office is educate entrepreneurs, because there's so much rubbish out there, whether it's the startup media or whether it's the Silicon Valley ecosystem. But we need to educate Indian entrepreneurs about what the Indian circumstances are. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen very well because the startup media is just full of press releases issued by VCs who want to tom about, how much money they've given XYZ, and it's all these success stories. It's actually the failure stories which teach you a lot more. So we encourage our entrepreneurs, build in public. I encourage my patients, you know, please share what you've learned. No one trusts doctors, but patients trust other patients. So if a patient did an authentic first person account, that makes such a world of a difference. So similarly, entrepreneurs don't trust investors. All bean counters, all crooks, they all want to sign a term sheet and take away all the gravy, all that stuff. And I get that.
Yeah.
Because partly because, it's the first time they're doing it, they're vulnerable, they're scared, they've heard all these horror stories. But entrepreneurs trust other entrepreneurs. So the one thing which bothers me about the Indian entrepreneurial startup ecosystem is we don't share knowledge, we don't share information, and I'm not sure why. And
Yeah.
there are so many. So why aren't we sharing? All right, your startup failed, but you learned something. What did you learn? Share with us.
Yeah.
But that's an uphill battle. I don't know whether it's an Indian thing or
You were also very vocal about a company called Byju's, which I'm sure now everyone has heard of, and you were quite critical of Byju's and even predicted its downfall. What were the warning signs that you saw that others may have overlooked, and how do you feel now that your predictions have come true?
So I could raise to say, hey, I told you so. See
Yeah,
how smart I was. But that's completely unfair. I mean, no one can tell you where a story is going to evolve. And for all you know, you could have pulled a rabbit out of the hat and, raised another $50 billion or
yeah,
whatever else. So who knows? So I never judge anything by outcomes because by definition, the future is uncertain. It's unpredictable. No one knows what the outcome is going to be. I judge by process. Was my integrity intact? Did I say what I actually felt? And part of the problem is when I said a lot of these things, I got a lot of flack.
yeah,
I paid quite a heavy price in the sense, I got slapped by lawsuits, got kicked out of LinkedIn. My family kept on telling me, you're an idiot, Dr. Malpani. Why are you doing all this? You think you're a crusader? Are you trying to be Don Quixote? Are you trying to clean up the system and stuff? And I keep on telling people, if wealthy, rich old men like me don't do it, who's going to do it? So I think a lot of the leading indicators are soft signs, what you call culture, what you call behavior. And when you deal with employees badly, when you pressurize employees, when your work culture is toxic,
yeah,
because your job is to get your employees to sell as much as possible to families who can't afford it, to make false promises, to do so many of these things. And part of the problem is this systematically censored criticism. They basically clamp down. When you're a multi-billion-dollar company and you advertise on LinkedIn, it's very easy to do some of that stuff.
yeah,
So they would clamp down and stuff. And I don't like being ill-treated. Fine. And maybe I'm an idiot. Maybe what I'm saying is wrong. Where am I saying I have a monopoly on knowledge or truth?
yeah,
But if I'm wrong, please engage with me. Tell me why I'm wrong. And I'm happy to have a discussion. So in fact, I actually told Byju's at that time, you have a reputation for a very toxic work culture. You should actually tie up with LinkedIn and create courses for creating an ethical work culture for what employees need to be rewarded for. Of
yeah,
course, nothing ever happened. Uh, and and I don't think, honestly, at some point, I don't think things are going to happen either. But that doesn't mean I don't continue fighting my battles. Some of them are lonely, some of them are whatever they are. But honestly, if I'm not true to myself, then really, what's the point of having life? So I think to that extent, I'm fairly clear. So a lot of people say, oh, you pick on everyone, you pick on everything, you're always criticizing. So I said, isn't that great? I'm an equal opportunity critic. I'm not picking on someone.
yeah,
I'm picking on something which I think is fundamentally wrong. And if it's fundamentally wrong, these are the reasons why. And if you think I'm wrong, engage with me. Do it politely. Don't call me names. Don't be rude. Maybe I am an idiot. So tell me why I'm an idiot. I'm happy to where, if I don't improve, if someone gives me valid feedback, then I am actually an idiot. So I've changed my mind multiple times. But I think the good thing about the Byju's experience was it taught me that even if you're not part of the crowd, it doesn't matter. You don't have to be.
yeah,
You have to learn to think for yourself. You learn to be independent. So does it give me any joy that Baiju is bankrupt? No, why should it be? I never have any, I've never met the guy. I have nothing against him. What I disliked was the way he treated his employees as a result of it. So toxic work culture, so you burden employees. Employees burden the families. Students end up suffering. Then you become the poster child for the startup ecosystem. Then everyone wants to raise billions of dollars. And then it just becomes increasingly toxic. So you wipe out all the good social impact entrepreneurs. So there were lots of second order consequences, which was sad. So, I wish, and I didn't start off criticizing them with the expectation that they would go down. Please remember
Yeah,
that.
of
I
course.
started off with the expectation that they would listen to someone who had their best interests at heart because I cared about kids. Because, hey, they were the largest player. They were reaching out to millions of students. They could have done so much good. That breaks my heart that they lost that opportunity. And not only did they lose that opportunity, they ended up giving all of EdTech a bad reputation.
Yeah.
Sad.
And look at what's happened in EdTech in 2024, right? There's barely any deal activity. Everyone talks about how the sector is dead, but there is also something to be said about all the investors who kept on investing in Byju's despite all the multiple media blow-ups that the company was going through, and a lot of them kept on participating in the follow-on rounds. And there's so much to be said about investors also participating in some of the activities that are going on in a company, where it's very easy for investors to finally then just resign from the board and wipe off their hands and say that this is not my problem, it was the founder doing this. But can you speak a little bit about that?
I can speak a lot about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
let's talk about
that's why I tell people there's a big difference between angel investors and VCs. And lots of first time entrepreneurs don't understand the difference. Hey, boss, you're signing a check. मुझे क्या फर्क पड़ रहा है?
it. Yeah.
And the difference is with angel investing, you sign your own personal money. So you can be picky and choosy. You don't need to do stupid things. If you find a deal is great, that's fine. Please understand though, the incentives for a VC are completely different. And sometimes I feel sorry for them because you're managing other people's money.
Yeah,
And managing other people's money is the hardest thing in the world to do, whether it's public markets or let's look
absolutely.
at public markets first. So, for example, when the markets are doing well and you're doing well, no one's happy because, hey, someone else is doing better. So, you idiot, your return is only, IRR is only 20%. That guy's IRR is 30%. I'm taking out my money and giving it to him. So, that's one. And when the markets are doing badly and everyone's doing badly, you're such an idiot. Why didn't you realize the markets were doing badly? I mean, investors aren't fortune tellers. They're all trying to do their best. But
Yeah,
that's the problem, that the incentives of the entrepreneur and the VC are not aligned. And people don't understand that. A VC, by definition, needs to make a quick buck. And the reason he needs to make a quick buck is because he needs to raise his next fund. He needs to exit. And that's a big problem which people have. And people don't realize that ultimately a VC is also an entrepreneur.
yeah,
And it's possible that his fund will be 10 years, but if he doesn't produce results in 3 years, how does he raise fund two and how does he raise fund three? So they mark to market and play these games. And, hey, you invest in my startup at a markup and I'll invest in yours. So at least on the books, it'll look like we're all making tons of money. And you're absolutely right. They just wash off all responsibility. And that bothers me. I think if you're on the board, you have some ethical fiduciary responsibility to the entrepreneur, to the customers. So you really can't do that. That really bothers me a bit. Okay, so let me take that in two parts. One is a lot of this is happenstance. In retrospect, when you look at it, say, oh, I planned this and I was so smart and I knew this was going to happen and all that. None of which is true. A lot of it is. So initially, I started angel investing in startups many, many years ago. This was in 2000. This was in the dot-com boom days when that's what everyone was doing. And, I thought I was very smart and let me go and do it and lost a lot of money, but that's a different thing. Then what is interesting is my daughter, she finished and then she went abroad and then she was working for a fund of funds, which was called Big Society Capital, which was investing in social impact startups. This was in England many
okay,
years ago, and this is one of the first few ones which started. And at some point, you don't want to become irrelevant to your kids' lives. And her whole thing was, you're just a fuddy duddy doctor. You may be a good doctor, but you don't understand anything I do. I said, okay, I'll show you. I do understand what you're doing. So I should understand how to read a balance sheet and a profit and loss statement and all that stuff. I'm still not very good at any of this. I don't even like doing it. But now the good thing is I can hire people to do
yeah,
all the boring stuff. So gradually over time, a lot of it was very episodic. So a lot of my earlier investments was through Mumbai Angels,
right,
which was a great learning experience because it was physical. You had so many smart people in the room asking great questions. You learned a lot. And then I would read a lot. I enjoy reading and I enjoy learning about stuff. And then at some point, you're getting a lot of money which you were spending, but how do you track some of that well? Which is why we said we need to expand. So we've got we had a team, we've increased the team, and we expect it to continue growing because God has been kind.
Yeah.
Let me explain that, and that's where that ties up with the asset allocation piece. I would never invest professional income in a startup. Professional income is blood, sweat, tears.
Yeah.
It's hard earned. It's I mean, like I said, doctors have a tough life whether you accept it or not because you can't predict what's going to happen. And when things go well, you're God, and when things don't go well, tum shaitan ho. So many different things which are outside your control. So you need to keep on, and you need to do it on a daily basis. Which is why a lot of my money is invested in the public markets.
Right.
And there's a story behind that, but the public markets have been exceptionally kind. So, the amount of money you make, and I know mental accounting doesn't make any sense and money is fungible, and I understand all that, but I'm not even saying easy come, easy go. But it's like, okay, theek hai, ye paisa to bana hai, what am I going to do with it? I don't need to drive a Mercedes or anything else. But what do I do? So what gives me joy? And therefore, if I lose that money, I don't lose any sleep over it, if you know what I'm saying. Because anyway, public markets are compounding anyway. This is more than enough money. So why don't I deploy it for something which gives me joy? And the trouble with public markets is two things. Yeah, I don't understand any of it anyway. So I don't do it. I do it through a PMS and, that stuff. And I have very good people to manage this. So returns have been extremely good. But the other thing is you're very detached. It's just a number. It's okay, fine. You made 2 crores, you made 4 crores, so big deal. Whereas with a startup, it's like, the journey, the rides, the ups, the downs, you're much more involved. And very honestly, I think this entire demarcation between startup investing, private investing, and public investing is completely artificial and makes no sense to me. Because we want today's startups to be listed in the public markets.
Absolutely.
And because we invest in startups, see, when you invest in a public market, the founder, the promoter, or whatever isn't going to give you the time of day. He doesn't care. Yeah. But you understand his journey because you're investing in startups. So this was exactly his life 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah. So I think, we're trying to call it cross-border learning is the fancy thing, but cross-domain learning, for lack of a better word. So I think there's lots to be learned from both sides. So we can try to help this startup to grow. These are what the next steps are. We can connect, let's say, a startup founder with someone who's a founder in a listed space because we have a sizable chunk of the company and, he might return our call. So many different things. So I think it's been a fun ride. And I'm happy with life, so there is professional income. That's hard-earned income, but that I primarily do for the emotional income, if you know what I'm saying. So that's one asset. The biggest chunk is obviously public markets because public markets can absorb so much money very easily without any of the things. So that, and the startups is very circumstantial. I'm under no pressure. The only person I need to keep happy is my wife. I'm not answerable to LPs and what are you doing and why is your return. So then I can choose not to invest for 2 years, or I can choose to make 5 investments in 2 weeks. So I think that's the good thing about it. So it's worked out well, and I'm happy with.
Yeah, I think public markets are a great learning ground to learn about what to look for when investing in startups. And I love learning from that because it tends to show you the opportunities. If you go through earnings reports, you can see how the management is thinking about different industries, and you get so much to learn from there. But, one of your tweets that I saw that went viral as well is where you showed your PMS returns over a period of time. And that, I think, got a lot of traction and attention from people. But like broadly, how do you think about public markets versus private markets in terms of asset allocation? Because a lot of family offices will only invest, say, 5 to 10% of their net worth into private markets and most of it in the public markets.
Honestly, I think it depends on when you get that opportunity. Now, if you fall in love with the founder and you really think this founder is going places, then I think it's perfectly okay to double up on your bet. So we have a lots of dry powder. Partly because it's the public markets have been so kind. So if we'd had this conversation 3 years ago, it would have been very different. That's quite likely we have this conversation 3 years from now. Again, it's going to be very different. So, who knows what the future holds. So we're happy to increase our ticket size. We made so many mistakes. So we think we're a little bit smarter at identifying the right founder. Actually, we're not. We make mistakes, but a different set of mistakes. So that's okay. The reality is entrepreneurs can be very charismatic, they can be very charming. It's very hard to judge a person based on a pitch deck or even two or three calls and interviews and everything else. So you will make mistakes. But my asset allocation is money I can afford to lose without losing sleep over. And like I said, fortunately, that's kept on increasing. Is the money I will put in the private markets because you've actually got to forget about it at least for 10 years.
Yeah.
Anyone who expects a return in 3 years and 4 years is just fooling yourself, and you're making that poor entrepreneur's life hell.
Yeah, and public markets have also been seeing record highs in terms of equities inflow. We're seeing 24,000 crores come in monthly, and there's so many new PMSs, AIFs, mutual funds that have exploded in the scene. The industry has grown to like 64 lakh crores now. So, how did you select the right fund manager for yourself?
I could always pretend, oh, I was so smart. I looked in his eyes, I could say, yeah, ye banda acha hai.
That's the answer I was
Honestly,
looking for.
yeah, but that's all rubbish. Huh? I am not honestly. So I will also say a lot of this was luck. And one of the people whom I give a lot of credit for, I mean, the only reason actually I am in this space is because of Rakesh Jhunjhunwala.
Right,
And he was so bullish about India right throughout. And, when he was alive, he would manage my money as a favor to me. So you could see the growth. And then you could see that other people who thought the same way he did. As a result of which, I bought a lot of books on value investing,
right,
on contrarian investing. And as long as I can find people who follow the same principle, like I said, I don't blame. So they've gone up, they've gone down. It doesn't bother me either way.
right.
Things which go up will go down. I expect the Indian markets to crash. Will they crash? When will they crash? Who knows any of this stuff? None of it even matters one way or the other, is my
Yeah,
limited point. As long as you can find someone who thinks, so what do I look for when I'm looking for a fund manager? One, person who has skin in the game. 100% of his personal assets should be invested in his own fund, whether it's a
right.
PMS or an AIF. I think that's a no brainer because if he doesn't have confidence in his own abilities, why should he expect me to have any confidence in him?
Yeah,
Second is all the standard stuff, the integrity, the humility to accept it could be wrong, the curiosity. Do I look for what his returns were the last 3 years and 5 years? Absolutely not. There is something classical called regression to the mean. And the worst possible thing is to be chasing returns. And that's the commonest mistake everyone makes.
yeah,
अरे यार ये म्यूचुअल फंड ने तो सिर्फ 20% किया, वो म्यूचुअल फंड ने 25% किया ओवर द लास्ट 3 इयर्स, चलो पैसा निकाल के वो 25, बॉस जिसने 25% किया लाभ वो 15% ही करने वाला है. So I don't think people are objective, and a lot of reasons why I can do this is because I read. So I understand, we occupy such a small slice of time in our lifetime,
yeah,
which you can learn from, the bubbles and the manias, whether it's the tulip mania, the historical stuff. And it's so much easy to learn from the past and apply those lessons to the present so you have a brighter future. Because when you're in the thick of the game itself, you can't think straight. And that's the reason I don't invest in public markets myself. I'm terrible at pulling the trigger. So it's far better. I'm quite happy to find someone who does a good job. Very happy for him to earn his fees. I'm very happy to pay the government the taxes, because hey, I make a capital gain, boss. That's fine.
yeah.
I don't
And
have a.
you very casually mentioned that Rakesh Jhunjhunwala was managing your money. Can you talk about that a little bit more? What was your relationship with him and what did you learn from him?
The guy was amazing. I mean, so Rakesh was a patient.
Right.
And so, that was fortuitous. And his office is very close to mine. So I would say, hey, can I come and hang out? Because I want to learn how you make these decisions and what you do and how you do them. So basically, fly on the wall. He had a great collection of books. I'd borrow them and read them. So that was helpful again. And I never second guessed his decisions. So, he said, do this. I'd say, okay, boss, हमको तो कुछ समझता नहीं है. तो बोल मैं करने वाला हूँ. And, the best thing was buy and hold, understand what I mean, as someone you're lucky is such a good friend, someone who cares about you, someone who has your best interests at heart and is willing to do it. I think that's such a huge blessing. So
Yeah.
he was very, very generous and, I learned a lot. And I think I learned a lot, not only by his entire philosophy about being bullish about India, by holding stocks, the magic of compounding, making decisions, just so many things
Yeah.
that you learn so much by osmosis, and so much of it is. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, I think his level of understanding of the public markets and India's potential, we are still witnessing to date. Whatever he'd predicted so many years ago has been coming true more and more. If you see what's happened with public sector banks or, other companies that he'd mentioned. So, such a remarkable person that India's lost, but he truly shaped the journey of the Indian public markets in a big way. You have invested in a lot of startups. So, coming back to the private space, what are the key factors that you look for in a startup when deciding to invest? And what kind of companies have you learned to avoid or pass over a period of time?
I'm a very slow learner. So, sometimes you tend to make the same mistakes. But honestly, I think, like everyone says, in angel investing, you first fall in love with the founder. And
Yeah.
that's true with everything, even the person you marry, you first fall in love and then you find reasons for why you need to marry them. So it's the way your brain is wired. You first use your emotions and then you use logic to justify. Thinking fast, thinking slow. So that's typically what happens. Having said all this, I'm a pretty much an idiot. I'm not good at stuff, which is why I hire people who then have a fiduciary responsibility towards me, who will then say, Dr. Malpani, you're an idiot, don't give this guy money, or these are the red flags. I
Yeah.
try to follow their advice. Sometimes I ignore it to my expense. And then they can say, see, I told you so. And then I learn and then hopefully don't make that mistake twice. But at some point I also say, Are yaar, mera paisa hai. If I don't spend it, what gives me joy, then why not? And they say, doc, you're an idiot, but you're right. If you want to be an idiot, that's very much on you. But so I think we marry the best of both worlds. The good thing is I can sign a check very quickly because it's my personal money and check sizes are increased. But we are also very disciplined. So we have an investment committee, we invite the entrepreneur, we do our due diligence, we talk to customers, we do interviews, 50 different things. So whenever you're engaging with a startup, we're also trying to add value to the startup's life because money is cheap. Money is available in lots of different places. So, and we don't have the most money. There are lots of people who can sign much bigger checks. So we're very clear about our investment thesis. And that's why we share so much of it publicly on our website at Malpani Ventures. This is the kind of person we're looking for. This is the kind of people whom we want to back. Are we domain agnostic? Absolutely. Do we have a soft corner for certain sectors? Absolutely. And I think that's the beauty because when you're raising money from someone else, your limited partners will give you a hard time. Hey, that's not what it said on your information memorandum. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. So it gives you a lot of agility, a lot of flexibility. But the great thing is, I don't have any FOMO. Okay, if it's hot, let it be hot. Mera kya jata hai? Someone else will make money, more joy to them. There are lots of stuff I don't understand and I perhaps never will understand. So you don't have to participate. Whereas if you're a VC and if five other VCs are now investing in quick commerce,
Yeah.
and if you don't, then your LPs will say, you idiot, you're not being able to source the right deals or, 50 other things. So fortunately, I don't need to deal with that.
Are you an LP in funds as well? Yeah.
So sometimes you're in LP because someone requests you, what, I need to
Yeah.
start this. Can you give me some money? So, like I said before, the GP is also an entrepreneur to a certain extent. And a lot of the stuff I invested in the money earlier days was hopeful that I would learn from these guys who had much more money, much more experience, would
Yeah.
share more. None of that has happened. So now I'm no longer very keen on being in. I said, boss, paisa banana hai to wo to public market mein ban hi raha hai.
Yeah.
So I was hoping that I would learn from these guys, but you don't get to learn much from being a GP in any of these funds because they send you all the statements and stuff, but they're all, I wouldn't say, they're all very, what can I say? They don't have any, I can't even use the word gory details, but they're all whitewashed to that
Yeah.
extent. I mean, all the interesting stuff is they don't necessarily share in public. If they don't talk about the near death experiences, they don't talk
Yeah.
about the mess ups. Everything is hunky dory. We're the best investors in the world. Don't worry, you should be giving us money for our next fundraise because see how well our startups are doing.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
too much of a sanitized version for me
Yeah.
to be able to learn anything. Whereas when you engage directly with the entrepreneur, I think you get to learn a lot more because you're at the coal face engaging with them directly.
I think what you're saying is very true and very interesting. It's actually a reflection of what's happening broadly in the market as well. I've met a lot of family offices who were investing via funds, but now a lot of them want to invest directly in startups through direct investing via their family offices. So a lot has changed in the relationship between family offices and fund managers as well. What are your thoughts on that broadly? Having been an LP in the fund, what has been the performance that you've been able to see?
So let's be honest, the person who has the money makes the decision. He's the one who pays the piper. So
Yeah,
at some point, this was a very new space. People didn't understand it. So people assumed, yeah, VCs are very smart. They understand stuff. They can model this better. So let me give. And at some point, for lots of family offices, it was a very deliberate, I need to put 4% of my overall assets. It's like pension funds do.
yeah,
You need a sweetener. You need to show that you're cutting edge, you're innovative. Makes for great cocktail party conversations.
yeah,
When you say you're a doctor, yeah, doc. When you say you're an angel investor, everyone's because someone has a son or someone has someone or the other who's fundraising, all that kind of. There's a
yeah,
coolness factor associated with it. But I think people, like you quite correctly said, are also realizing that sometimes having an intermediary is helpful, but sometimes the intermediary is not necessarily adding much value.
yeah,
Again, it all depends. I think some of it also depends on who the funds are. And I think even worldwide, the top 10% of the VC funds deliver outstanding returns,
yeah,
completely uncorrelated with the rest. But most VCs don't make too much money. And
yeah.
part of it is the fees, part of it is, you're doing what the rest of the other VCs are doing. So, where is your competitive moat? Where is your USP? So it's a bit hard. And I get a little disillusioned sometimes, but yeah. But don't forget, I think you also need enough bandwidth. So now, suppose, for example, your family office has to manage 5,000 crores, and suppose you decide I'm going to asset allocate, let's say, 500 crores or whatever. Then you can't really put it in 500 startups and give them 1 crore
Yeah.
each. So then you need to invest in startups who will be able to absorb 50 crores because
Yeah.
you're going to say, okay, maybe 10. What else can you do? It becomes hard to find startups like that in India. So, ironically, these very large family offices, pardon my French, I think make, I won't say the worst deals, but often aren't because, again, they have their own limitations.
Yeah.
And the trouble with a family office is then again, you're adding your own layer of intermediary who
Yeah.
then has to asset allocate and whose job is to diversify and whose job is then to pick five funds of which with the hope that one fund will do well and the other one will do badly. But when you go back and talk to your boss, you talk about the one which did well and you don't talk about the one which did
Yeah. Yeah, you're highlighting something very important. I think, we always just talk about the wins. And even with fund managers, we're also LPs in different funds. So I completely echo what you're saying. The learning was that direct investing is better. It depends on the quantum of capital that you have, of course. But I think you are better off building direct relationships with founders and also looking at other options to diversify yourself. But anytime an intermediary is there, there is definitely loss in terms of both returns and what you can potentially see from that asset class. But given that you've been doing the family office bit for so long, what are some of the learnings that you can share with the audience? Because a lot of new family offices have emerged in the last 5 years. Now everyone wants a piece of the private markets. So, what are your top three learnings from this?
It's always simple. Don't do it as a status symbol. Don't do it because you want to show off to people, hey, I run a foundation, I run a family office, or he has a family office and therefore I need a family office. That's the worst possible reason and
Yeah.
you'll mess up. So often, honestly, a lot of this was opportunistic. I don't understand any of this space. But one of my PMS managers is a very good friend. And I arm twisted him. I said, boss, I need to put money. He hates this. He doesn't like private markets at all. He says, what? There's no data. There's nothing else. All
Yeah.
these guys make all these tall promises. None of it comes true. Dr. Malpani, you're an idiot. But he said, whatever, you're an idiot, but you're my friend. So I
Yeah.
can't say no to you. And then it's great because then I can piggyback. So he acts like a devil's advocate, does the pre-mortem, keeps me grounded. It's much easier for me to hire people because honestly, what do I understand about a lot of this?
Yeah.
But he does. So then he kind of keeps me this thing. So that's very, very helpful because then there's a logical, it's an adjacency. So it's a very logical extension. And I spent a long time. This is Manish Gupta. He runs Solidarity. And I kept on saying, why do you have these blinkers on? Why are you only doing public markets? Now he finally says, there may be sense. So I said, it's actually a gradient. You look at all these SME IPOs.
Yeah.
So, there is obviously the large caps, there is the mid caps, there's the micro caps. Why don't we go after nano caps? Why don't we go after the guys? And I think even family offices are now looking for the pre IPOs.
Yeah.
I think the pre IPOs are great, but again, the big problem is the reinvestment risk.
Yeah.
Because what happens after the IPO gets over?
Yeah.
Again, there's just so many ways of being able to this thing. So I think it's a question of what are you optimizing for? In my life now, I'm optimizing for happiness. I'm not really optimizing for, financial returns. So I can afford to make very irrational decisions. Uh, Works
But
well for me.
having said that, what are realistic expectations to have from both asset classes, private and public markets?
Okay, so I think in all fairness, one of our things was, again, I always say post tax, post fees. Everything else is just a
Yeah.
vanity rubbish. So I would be very, very happy if I got 18% year on year with the public markets. Now, like I said, God has been kind over the last. Do I expect that to happen? No. Because the reality is that whenever the P for the entire market is so high, typically you are going to see a correction.
Yeah.
Things are going to, how does it make a difference to me? I don't need to withdraw the money. I can live through some of these booms and busts and cycles. I have the patience. So it really, and I've seen a lot of these things. That's one advantage of having white hair. And as far as expectations with startups, honestly, do I expect to make any money on them? No. If I make money, I'll treat that as a bonus and count my blessings. So again, I think I should tell you one thing. I am a Marwadi, okay? So I'm not throwing money away. This is not
Yeah.
charity. This is not philanthropy. But I also think I'm reasonably sorted. But I think my role is to be a catalyst. But the thing about being a catalyst that you're only helping a chemical reaction. You don't know what the reactants are. You don't know what the end product is going to be. So I come from a position of complete humility. I have no idea. No one else in the world has any idea, no matter what they posture and no matter what they pretend. And we've seen enough of that. Forget about Byju's. Look at Theranos, for example.
Yeah.
So there are enough of these stories. And I think that's great because in that sense, then I know as little or as much as anyone else. So I'm happy to pursue my bets. Will I make money? Most probably not, but that's okay.
And how do you think about investing in different geographies?
So I'm perfectly okay with that. Because at some point you have to think, what value am I adding? So when I say different geographies, I will not invest out of India. Partly because not only do I not understand any of that stuff, I also think the opportunities in India over the next decade are going to be far better than anywhere else. So to that extent, I'm fairly clear. When I say, so I know a lot of VCs will say, hey, my office is in Bangalore, I will only invest in Bangalore startups. To that extent, I don't care. Because, I've realized one thing. You get entrepreneurs who are of two kinds. One who thinks that you add value, and the second who doesn't think you add value. Now, the one who thinks you add value, they will reach out to you wherever they are. These days, Zoom calls, emails, all that stuff, geographically, it doesn't really matter. And the ones who don't think you add value, even if they're in Mumbai, you can arm twist them and say, hey, come to the office and come and meet me. But they're not going to do anything very differently anyway. Uh, so you can't really force anyone to do anything. That's one thing I've learned. So honestly, I don't really care. I actually have a soft corner for tier 2 and tier 3 because I think they have a chip on their shoulder. They're more willing to prove themselves. And I think that's where the opportunities for India are. And these are people who actually live there on a daily basis and understand. So they're much more likely to have a contrarian approach. And I love people who give me insights which I wouldn't have got otherwise. So, at some point you say, hey, I'm never going to invest in this space. And then this bright guy turns up and he says, this is what you thought. But you know what? This is not true. And he said, wow, that's interesting. So why don't we back him and why don't we see what happens? We try not to put pressure on our entrepreneurs. In the sense, we're not asking them for a return in 2 years or 3 years. We try to make sure that our clauses are not founder unfriendly. And that's the reason why we educate and we share on our website and try to tell them what they should be doing. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And that's okay.
And you plan to invest over 500 crores over the next 5 years. So, where are you most excited about investing?
I can't predict that, honestly. Like I said before, you can't really say, see, that's the good thing about public markets. You have a check, you sign it, and then, it'll get absorbed in no time. With this, and just because you have money doesn't mean you're going to blow it. Doesn't mean you're going to do anything very stupid with it. And again, the space where we invest in, sometimes the capacity of that startup to absorb money also becomes limited.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. So, if the pre-money valuation, and we've decided our sweet spot is a pre-money valuation of between 20 to 80 crores. So, bichara lega to bhi kitna lega? Because
Yeah.
he can't excessively dilute himself. So, we definitely need to then diversify. But then that also comes at a cost. Because then, so our major focus is now on identifying people who trust us, whom we can trust. Honestly, we're not good at that because we've realized pre-funding and post-funding entrepreneurs can be very different.
Yeah.
uh, I mean, again, that's the nature of the beast. I get that. I'm not critical. Investors can't exist without entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs can exist without investors. I love bootstrapped entrepreneurs. I actually tell them, don't raise money from me, because raising money from me comes at a price. I may not be a
Yeah.
price you're willing to pay. So please understand the downside. And if you can bootstrap, that's great. But I loved failed founders. They've learned at someone else's expense. They're much more careful because you don't get a third chance always in
Yeah.
India. So they're grateful for the second chance. So many other things. But having said all this is wisdom after the event. In the
Yeah.
sense, you first fall in love and then you rationalize the decision.
Hopefully, a lot of people can benefit from your advice and wisdom that you've garnered over the years. But let's also talk about building an audience in today's time, right? You built a very loyal audience on LinkedIn, where you had an unfortunate experience, but then now on Twitter, also X, you've built a very loyal fan following again. And people really appreciate what you have to say because your views are so straightforward, and so you say it with so much candor and vulnerability sometimes as well. So people appreciate that because it's very refreshing in today's time. What is your view? What are you thinking? What goes on behind those viral social media posts?
They're not done with the intention of going viral, very
Yeah,
honestly. I've realized one
but they
thing.
often do, right?
But I have no control. You
Yeah,
let me, I always tell people, do an A/B split test. Do 10 posts, predict which five you think or one is going to go viral, and you will be completely wrong for so many reasons. You can't read other people's minds, you can't figure out the algorithm and stuff like that. So honestly, at some point, I think the worst way of becoming rich is trying to chase money, because money is optimally a side effect
yeah,
of doing what you enjoy, and then if it comes, that's great, and even if it doesn't come, that's okay. That wasn't your primary intention anyway, so that's it. But having said that, you're right. It's so unfortunate that people aren't willing to say publicly what I do. They say it privately. You
yeah,
give them a couple of drinks, this thing, and they'll do all that. And I think life is kind. I don't have to be politically correct. I don't have to raise money. I don't have to keep people happy. There will be consequences at some point. And, I'm a big boy. I always tell my wife, please make sure my lawyer's phone is on your speed dial. He's a very good friend. At some point when I get picked up, then just make sure that, but that'll also be a new experience. Who knows what kind of experience it'll be a different thing. But so I think it's okay. And I keep on telling you, if senior citizens like me who are wealthy don't speak up, who's going to do the speaking?
yeah,
Because young kids are much more vulnerable. There's so many other things. So again, I think that's one of my advantages. And I often end up saying what's on people's minds anyway. The only difference is I say it publicly. So people will agree and some of it will resonate. But I'm not trying to pretend to be anything because I don't need to keep anyone happy, is my limited point.
yeah,
And the other good thing is I read a lot, which means a lot of what I think, a lot of what people say, oh, you're a crackpot. I realize, what? This guy wrote it 30 years ago. Noam Chomsky said this 25 years ago. So maybe I'm not a crackpot.
yeah,
Maybe there is some sense in what I'm saying. Aaron Swartz said it. I have more respect for Linus Torvalds than I have for Bill Gates. There's just so many other things. So how does it really matter? And I have a particular opinion. This is the reason why I have this opinion. I share it, but none of these books are bestsellers.
yeah.
They're all 20 years old. And, that's the other edge. I'm quite happy to read old stuff because I think, it's anti fragile, it stood the test of time. I enjoy it. You kind of make sense of what's happening. And, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Yeah.
So I think that's great. I have lots of mental models and I enjoy learning.
Yeah, as they say, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Everything's been written before, is said before. Love that piece. And what are some of your guiding principles in life? What is the north star that you're working towards?
Okay. Let me break it up into two things. One is the generic Gyan piece,
Yeah,
which is, integrity. That, if you're not honest, fate is going to catch up at some point. I think curiosity is very helpful because it helps you keep on learning all the time.
Yeah.
And I think humility, because I always tell all my patients, I may be a doctor, but the ocean of medical ignorance is so much larger than the island of medical knowledge. So I'm a
Yeah.
great IVF specialist, but there's just so much we don't know about what happens after we transfer an embryo inside. And every few years, hey, medical breakthrough, pregnancy rates increase. And then after 15 years, you realize, hey, that was just a false alarm. Or, like I told you before, it's very hard to predict some
Yeah.
of this stuff. So being a doctor keeps you grounded in the sense you think, hey, this patient's definitely going to get pregnant, and she doesn't. And you think this startup is definitely going to do very well, and it doesn't. So I think to that extent. But I'll tell you what gives me joy. And this has been over time. The one good thing and the one thing I'm very grateful to Byju's for, and I always will be, is what did I know about the education space? Nothing. I always prided myself on being a gold star, a topper. Education was a big thing. My kids were bright, did well, all that stuff. So, hey, do a great school, go to a great college, get all this and stuff. And that's such a broken model. It's an industrial age model.
Yeah.
And when I criticize Byju's, a lot of people would say one thing: you're jealous because you missed the chance to invest in him, or you've invested in competing startups which aren't doing well, and therefore you're bad mouthing him, or you talk a lot, but are you able to provide a better alternative? And that's the reason I'm so critical about coaching classes and tuitions. And the good thing is, then there are better alternatives, and you need to learn. Is it unschooling? Is it homeschooling? Is it community microschooling? Is it Finnish microschools? And the reality is that it's going to be a multiple models, because how can one size fit all? So I think the two things which are going to be game changers is, one is the computer, because I think digital learning is important, but I think a mobile is terrible and a tablet is terrible. And this is what most people think of when they think of digital learning, because of the COVID or whatever
Yeah.
else. I think so you have to spend some time telling them that if you wouldn't let your kid learn from a mobile, why should your driver's kid learn from a mobile? You're actually setting him up for failure.
Yeah.
One is the PC, and the second is, I think, all the AI tools, which means you can create a personalized 24/7 tutor who never forgets, who always remembers, who's adapted to your style. So there's Khanmigo, there's so many of them, and
Yeah.
these are just going to proliferate and multiply. And then they will create the roadmap, and your learning journey will be very different from someone else's learning journey. Because, hey, at 8 years old, this is what you care about. At 9, you care about something else. And your interest, which will allow you to pursue your own curiosity. And I think classrooms are terrible learning places. You
Yeah.
force kids to sit down. That's not natural at all.
Yeah.
Lectures are the worst form of teaching. Everyone knows that. Teaching is not equal to learning. You cram for exams and you don't do well in school. What do your parents do? They send you to more classrooms in tuition classes. All broken stuff. Now everyone thinks I'm a crackpot, and I think that's okay, fine. I am a crackpot. So again, I say, why should anyone believe me? Yes, I am a crackpot. I'm an IVS specialist, not an educator. Doesn't understand. And everyone says, oh, but your kids weren't homeschooled. Yeah, they weren't homeschooled because they're 35 years old. There wasn't any opportunity at that time. But if I continue doing what I did 30 years ago, then I'm the idiot. Or perhaps you're the idiot, because you don't realize how much times have changed. And then you're burdening your kids with whatever you did, which is no longer relevant. So again, so we're very focused on, so we have this entire chain of Apni Pathshalas, lots of different experiments, where our major focus is we need to make our students the heroes. So one thing is, every student needs their own website. And
Right.
that's the one thing I had to change in the entire education system. That's all I would do. Why? It doesn't matter whether you're a government kid, it doesn't matter whether you're an IB kid, it doesn't matter whether you're a driver's kid, anything else. Anyone can create a website these days. There are lots of no coding
Yeah.
platforms, lots of kids will teach you how to do that. Now just think, even if it's a 5-year-old who has a website, 5-year-olds love showing off and their parents love showing off. So great, give him a phone, let him take pictures, let him upload whatever he wants. Over a period of 4 years, this is now becoming a dynamic capture of how he's grown, what he's learned, what his talents, what his skills are. And the problem is, we underestimate 6 years old. But most 6 years old today are 10 times smarter than I am,
Yeah.
and what I was when I was 6. Let them showcase. And why are you crippling yourself with a LinkedIn resume? With a website, there is no bandwidth constraint.
Yeah.
anyone can see what you've done. So just look at second order consequences. You want to freelance? Great. You can do that. You want to impress your teacher? Great. You want to learn for yourself? Great. Because the great thing is the best way to learn something is to teach someone else. Once you have a website, you're happy to teach anyone else. Teach in Gujarati, teach in Marathi, teach,
Yeah.
whatever, chess, anything you want. Need not be academic, could be anything else. The moment you start creating content, it becomes a positive virtuous cycle. You get a little dopamine kick. Oh
Yeah.
wow, 100 people visited my website, 200 people. Uski website मेरी website से अच्छी क्यों है? How can I compete?
Yeah.
शर्मा जी की वेबसाइट की बेटे की वेबसाइट तेरे वेबसाइट से अच्छी क्यों? Whatever. Just imagine 250 million students had a website. India would actually become a digital superpower.
Yeah.
Because not only then did you have content, you have community, obviously you can create commerce, all these guys could freelance. Let's follow this kid through the next 15 years of his life. His ability to get into any college anywhere in the world is so much better. He doesn't have to do a stupid 2-page college essay. Because, hey, anyone who wants to look at it can see what he's done. He plays tennis, he's done this, he's been team captain, everything else. This is what he started, everything. Imagine what happens when he's applying for a job.
Yeah.
There's just so much depth and color and everything. Imagine when he wants to marry someone. His father-in-law say, "Arey, wow, yaar." Sorry, kidding apart. But there's just so much ability to be able to do that stuff. And then my point is, we need to make students creators. The trouble is they're all consumers today, but that's partly our fault. We've not taught them how to create. And they'll do it very, very easily. So that's my dream. Whether it happens in Apni Pathshala, whether it happens in Unschooled, I really don't care. But I think we can show that it doesn't matter whether your father is a driver or whether your father is a millionaire. We all have those abilities. And then we're giving them a global showcase to show kids, this is what your talent is, this is what it is. And then everyone's going to say, Dr. Malpani, your kids do well because they were born with a silver spoon. They won the ovarian lottery. Yeah, all that's fine. But explain to me why my driver's kid's doing so well. Or, yeah, okay, I can't compete with doctor, but yeah, I can compete with my driver's kid. So that's the sense of enablement and empowerment we want to give to these kids.
Love it. And I love that idea. I have a toddler right now. I am going to adopt this idea of a website. I think it's a great idea. Everyone should have a website to be able to showcase it because, I see so many kids scrambling in class 10th and 11th to prepare for their college applications to just put something on their resume. But that's a very refreshing way of looking at it. I always ask my guests these questions, Dr. Malpani, looking ahead at the age of 80, reflect on your life journey. What profound insights do you think you would have at that point? Specifically, distill it into one significant learning, one regret, and one pivotal life decision.
Ouch, that's 3 questions in one. So let's
Yeah.
break it up one by one. Let's start with the first one. One.
One
So
significant learning.
we need to respect kids a lot more than we do. I think just because we're older and we're bigger than them and they're financially and emotionally dependent on us is ridiculous. There's just so much potential. We need to give them a chance. And the great thing is they have that opportunity. 40 years ago, even when I joined medical college, it was hard. Nothing in government colleges or hospitals worked. You had to run around, a lot of scut work. So you'd always feel like a second class citizen when you went to an American hospital. All that's changed. And I think to that extent, the internet is a great democratic leveler. People keep on talking about the digital divide, but that's ridiculous. How much does a PC cost? And even if you can't afford a PC, you can subsidize it. There are EMIs. You can share it with 4 other people. Again, so I think community micro schools can make PCs easily accessible. So I think if a parent watches a kid using a PC, and then the parent learns from the kid how to use the PC, the way the parent's going to look at the kid's going to change dramatically. Trust me about it. So
Absolutely.
that's one thing.
And one regret.
One regret is sometimes I wish I wasn't so blunt. In the sense, I end up making a lot of enemies unnecessarily. This is something my wife gets very upset about. She said, "Why do you have to? Can't you be more politically correct? And why can't you couch it in more, palatable terms and stuff like that?" I said, "You know what? You married me. You're stuck with me. Whatever else it is." So I think just accept the fact that, that's the way I have very low tolerance for bullshit and hypocrisy and stuff like that. Maybe I would have been richer maybe. Or so, I never get invited twice. Because, I say a lot of things and I ruffle a lot of feathers. People say this guy's an idiot, better to keep away. So that's fine. That's the only regret.
And one pivotal life decision.
Uh, I think that is actually, if you say I have another 20 years, hopefully there'll be more pivotal life decisions. So, very honestly, some of my decisions were made for me, like becoming a doctor, like deciding whom to marry, because I chased my wife, or she allowed me to chase her, let me put it that way, for a long time, stuff like that. So, that's again different. But I think one of the pivotal decisions is the decision to angel invest, because I think now the beauty is that learning has now become a positive virtuous cycle. See, otherwise you read a book and it's theoretical. Okay, now you're a little bit smarter. Now I read a book and I can share what I read with so many people on Twitter. So there's a reason. But much more importantly, I can read and I can share that with the entrepreneurs. I can decide where the world is likely to be, or what I think the world is likely to be 2 years down the road. So you can actually translate Saraswati into Lakshmi.
Yeah.
And I think that's magical because people don't respect Saraswati. People respect Lakshmi. So take care if you can show people ki the more you read, the more the money you make, or the more you learn, the richer you become. Maybe people will start respecting learning more. I don't know.
What a fascinating idea to end the episode with. Thank you so much, Dr. Malpani, for taking out the time to be with us here today. I'm sure the audience will learn so much from your experience, and thank you for sharing your insights so
No,
candidly
but
with
thank
us.
you so much for having me. I think that's very kind of you. Like I said before, I learned a lot during this, and I really appreciate the fact that you've taken so much time and trouble in organizing the podcast, using the right tools, doing the homework, and asking some great questions. So thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.